The Tunisian desert in February 1943 is a place that punishes everything alive. A hot, dry wind races across the eastern dorsal mountains, picking up sand sharp enough to strip paint from steel and hurling it into the eyes of men who have never before fought a battle. At dawn on the 14th, that wind carries something far worse than grit. It carries the whistle and crash of German 88mm shells, the most feared sound on any battlefield in the world. American soldiers of Tuck Corps wake inside shallow scrapes scratched into forward slopes, blinking up at a sky suddenly full of death. Most of them have been in North Africa less than 90 days. Many have never heard a tank gun fire in anger. Now they hear dozens all at once, and the ground itself seems to rise and fall beneath the impacts. Major General Lloyd Fredendall commands the Corps from a deep concrete bunker. He has ordered engineers to blast into a hillside 30 miles behind the fighting. He believes distance equals safety and clarity. He is wrong on both counts. His orders travel by staff car along roads already under Stuka attack, arriving hours late or not at all. Frontline units receive fragments of plans, contradictory instructions, and sometimes nothing but silence. Companies fight in isolation. Battalions disappear from the maps entirely. In the narrow defiles of Kasserine Pass itself, men of the 1st Armored Division watch columns of Panzer Mark IVs and the 1st Tigers advance in perfect formation, gunners traversing their turrets with the calm precision of men on a peacetime maneuver field. American Sherman tanks rush forward in small, brave, uncoordinated groups and are destroyed almost as fast as they appear. Tank destroyer crews, still shackled to a pre-war doctrine that insists they must pursue and chase enemy armor like cavalry, race into the open desert and are gutted by concealed 88s before most can even return fire. By February 19th, the Germans have torn a hole 20 miles deep through the American center. Erwin Rommel, though sick, exhausted, and locked in bitter argument with his superiors about strategy, smells total victory for a fleeting moment. His temporary superior, Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, sends a triumphant signal to Berlin. The Americans fight like Italians. They collapse at the first determined assault. They have no stomach for close combat. Axis radio propagandists crow across Europe. The amateur army of the New World has been taught its place. The Americans are inherently inferior soldiers who will never master the profession of arms. Newspapers in neutral countries run headlines asking whether the United States can ever be trusted with a major land campaign. In London, Winston Churchill stares at the situation map in silence, puffing a cigar down to a stub. In Washington, Franklin Roosevelt demands immediate explanations from George Marshall. Allied confidence wavers on the edge of fracture. Yet inside the smoking wreckage of the American front, something is already moving that no ends in Berlin cannot possibly detect. Captain John Knight Waters, George Patton's son-in-law, leads a small counterattack near Spiba and is captured after his half-track is knocked out. Sitting in the back of a German staff car with his hands tied, he watches panzer columns roll past in perfect order. A courteous German colonel leans in and offers him a cigarette. "You fought bravely, Captain," the colonel says in fluent English, "but courage alone does not make a soldier. War is a craft. One does not learn it overnight." Waters says nothing. His ears are still ringing from the 88s, but his mind is already racing. He is thinking about radios that never answered, artillery that never arrived, and orders that made no sense when they finally came. He is thinking, "We will learn, and we will learn faster than you imagine possible." Back at the command bunker, a shaken operations officer reads the first after-action reports aloud to Colonel Benjamin Dixon, Eisenhower's personal eyes and ears. The reports are savage in their honesty. Officers and enlisted men alike write exactly what went wrong, without varnish or excuse. No coordinated fire plan existed. Units lost radio contact within the first 2 hours. Tank destroyers were employed as tanks, results disastrous. Infantry dug in on forward slopes and were observed and destroyed. Corps command post too far in the rear, orders obsolete before delivery. Air support requested but never acknowledged. Dixon cables Algiers in plain language. "We have been decisively outfought, outmaneuvered, and outgeneraled at every level. Recommend immediate relief of the Corps commander and complete overhaul of tactics, techniques, and procedures." Dwight D. Eisenhower receives the message in a whitewashed villa, above the Mediterranean. The Supreme Commander looks suddenly old. He has staked his reputation and the entire Allied strategy on the belief that American troops can fight and win alongside the battle-hardened British. Now the world is laughing, and the laughter sounds like the end of everything he has worked for. He does not rage. He does not search for scapegoats. He does not defend the indefensible. Instead, he makes two decisions that will change the course of the war. First, he orders every single after-action report, no matter how brutal, to be collected, copied, and distributed without censorship. Second, he picks up the telephone and calls the one man ruthless enough, energetic enough, and brilliant enough to tear a broken army apart and rebuild it in weeks. "George," Eisenhower says, his voice flat with fatigue, "I need you in Tunisia. I need you there yesterday." On the night of February 20th, something strange begins to happen along the shattered American front. The retreat has not yet fully stopped. Rommel is already wheeling south against the British Eighth Army, but small teams of officers and senior NCOs move through the lines carrying notebooks and flashlights. They wake exhausted soldiers in their foxholes and ask questions no one has ever asked them before. What exactly did you see? Why didn't your radio work? Where was the supporting artillery when you needed it? If you could fight this battle again tomorrow, what would you do differently? A private from the 19th Combat Engineers, his face black with powder burns, answers without hesitation. "Sir, we were told to dig in on the forward slope so we could observe. The Germans could see every shovelful of dirt from 3 miles away and shot us to pieces. Next time we dig on the reverse slope, register the artillery ahead of time and let them come to us." The lieutenant writes it down word for word. In a dry wadi behind WWII Pass, a tank destroyer sergeant tells a visiting major that chasing panzers across open desert is suicide. "We need to dig the guns in, camouflage them, let the tanks roll right up to the muzzles." The major nods, sketches a hull-down firing position in the dirt, and 2 days later bulldozers are already scraping the first experimental emplacements into the rock-hard Kalish. The reports pour rearward by the hundreds, scribbled on ration cartons, on shell casing paper, on the backs of maps. They are carried to a requisitioned schoolhouse in Constantine where British boffs and American clerks type them through the night under bare bulbs. No officer is punished for speaking the truth. No one is told to forget the mistakes and move on. Every mistake is catalogued, photographed, mapped, and transformed into a lesson. On February 22nd, Lloyd Fredendall is quietly relieved of command. His successor has not yet arrived, but the old ways are already dead and buried in the Tunisian sand. In Berlin, the German High Command files its final assessment of the campaign. American combat effectiveness remains low. Further defeats will almost certainly break their will entirely. They could not be more wrong, because the army that broke at Kasserine Pass was already, even as the last shells fell, becoming something new. On March 6, 1943, a single C-47 lands at Talergma Airfield in a storm of red dust. Out steps Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr., polished helmet gleaming, ivory-handled revolvers at his hips, face carved from granite and fury. The ground crew stare as if Mars himself has come down to walk among mortals. Patton wastes no time on ceremony. He climbs into a jeep and demands to be driven straight to the front, any front, so he can see with his own eyes what the hell has happened to the United States Army. What he sees makes him almost incoherent with rage. Soldiers are unshaven, uniforms unbuttoned, rifles uncleaned. Sentries lounge in the shade instead of standing at attention. Staff officers argue over whose turn it is to use the only working telephone. Patton's driver barely brings the jeep to a halt before the general is out, screaming at a group of lounging tank crewmen. "You sorry sons of bitches look like a mob of tramps. The next man I see without his tucked in is going to wish his mother had never been born." Within 48 hours, the entire II Corps knows that a new god walks the earth, and his name is discipline. But Patton is not merely a screaming martinet. He is the mailed fist Eisenhower has chosen to smash the old culture and clear space for something new. While he terrifies the surface of the army into spit and polish, quieter, deeper revolutions are already underway in olive-drab tents and requisitioned schoolrooms from Constantine to Feriana. Eisenhower himself arrives in Tunisia on March 10th. He brings with him a small, hand-picked team of officers who have spent the previous week doing something no army in history has ever done on this scale. They have read every single after-action report from Kasserine, annotated them, cross-referenced them, and turned them into a living document titled Notes on Recent Operations, Sect Corps, February 1943. The document is not classified. It is printed by the thousands and distributed down to company level. American soldiers open it and read, in black and white, exactly how badly they were beaten and exactly why. There are no euphemisms, there is no sugarcoating, there is only truth, raw and bleeding. One passage is read aloud so often that men memorize it. The primary causes of failure were lack of coordination between arms, poor march discipline, inadequate reconnaissance, and the employment of armor in small packets without infantry or artillery support. These faults are correctable by training and leadership. They are not inherent in the American soldier. That single sentence becomes a battle cry. It tells every private and lieutenant that the disaster was not their fault, but fixing it now is. In a dusty courtyard outside Tebessa, Patton assembles the entire 1st Armored Division, thousands of exhausted men standing in the burning sun, and delivers the shortest, most memorable speech of his life. "I don't give a damn about your individual personalities," he roars. "You are not special. You are not heroes yet. You are a mob that got its ass kicked by professionals. From this moment forward, you will train like professionals. You will march like professionals. And the next time you meet those Nazi sons of bitches, you will kill them or they will kill you. There is no third option." Then he does something no American general has ever done. He orders every officer from colonel down to second lieutenant to attend daily classes taught by British veterans of the Western Desert, men who have been fighting Rommel for 2 years. The classes are brutal. British sergeants tear apart American defensive positions in front of their creators and explain, step by step, why they would have lasted exactly 4 minutes against a Panzer Grenadier attack. American officers are not allowed to argue. They are only allowed to listen, take notes, and change. Meanwhile, Eisenhower issues a series of directives that amount to a complete rewiring of the American way of war. Centralized command posts are abolished. From now on, corps and division commanders must be forward where they can see the battlefield. Radio discipline is enforced with courts-martial. Every net will use the same procedures, the same brevity codes, the same phonetic alphabet. Artillery forward observers are pulled from every field artillery battalion and formed into elite liaison teams that live, eat, and sleep with the infantry and armor they support. Perhaps the most revolutionary change concerns tanks and tank destroyers. The old doctrine, written in the peaceful classrooms of Fort Benning in 1940, declared that tanks never fight tanks. Their job is exploitation, while separate tank destroyer battalions hunt enemy armor. Kasserine proved that doctrine was suicidal fantasy. Overnight, the Tank Destroyer Center at Camp Hood, Texas, receives frantic cables, rewrite everything. In North Africa itself, Colonel Bruce Palmer assembles every tank destroyer battalion commander and tells them bluntly, "Forget the book. From now on, you dig in, you camouflage, you wait, and you kill from ambush. If you chase tanks again, I will personally relieve you." Across the rear areas, training becomes an obsession. Infantry companies that once practiced maneuvers once a week now rehearse dawn attacks every single day. They dig trenches on reverse slopes, register artillery on every possible avenue of approach, and practice immediate counterattacks the moment a position is penetrated. Tank crews learn to fight hull down, using folds in the ground that no one noticed before Kasserine. Artillery batteries conduct time-on-target shoots for the first time in American history. Dozens of guns firing at different ranges so that every shell lands on the same spot at the same second. The first time they try it in training, the earth erupts in a single cataclysmic roar that leaves observers speechless. Patton drives himself and everyone else to the edge of collapse. He appears unannounced at field kitchens at 400, demanding to know why the coffee is cold. He fines officers for dusty boots and sends entire companies marching around their bivouac with full packs because one man's bayonet scabbard was unpolished. Soldiers hate him with a passion that borders on love, because for the first time since landing in North Africa, they feel part of something that might actually work. In the evenings, small groups gather around campfires and talk, not about women or home, but about fire support tables, about the importance of enfilade versus defilade, about how to sight a 3-inch gun so a tiger cannot see it until it is 50 yards away. A corporal in the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion coins a phrase that spreads like wildfire: "We got schooled at Kasserine. Now we're opening our own university." German intelligence listens to the American radio nets and hears something they do not understand. The chatter is suddenly crisp, professional, calm. Call signs change every day. Requests for fire support are answered within minutes instead of hours. Reconnaissance aircraft report American positions that look nothing like the careless sprawls of February. Now every hilltop bristles with carefully concealed weapons. Every wadie hides a killing ground. Hans-Jürgen von Arnim reads the intercepts and dismisses them. Americans, he believes, are constitutionally incapable of the kind of iron discipline the Wehrmacht takes for granted. They lack the centuries of Prussian tradition. They are rich boys playing at war. In a few weeks, when the next offensive begins, they will crumble exactly as they did before. He cables Berlin. No significant improvement in enemy combat efficiency noted. Morale remains brittle. On March 17th, Patton formally assumes command of II Corps. That same day, Eisenhower issues one final order that seals the transformation. Every soldier, from private to general, will receive a pocket-sized pamphlet titled Lessons from Kasserine. Inside are 20 simple rules, illustrated with crude sketches. Never dig on the forward slope. Always register defensive fires before dark. Tanks and infantry move together or not at all. Radios are more important than rifles. Guard them with your life. American soldiers read it, laugh at the cartoons, and then fold it carefully into their breast pockets next to their cigarettes. They are tired, sunburned, and sick of Patton's inspections. But for the first time since Torch, they believe, really believe, that the next time they meet the Germans, they will not run. They weren't the same soldiers anymore, and soon the Germans would find out. By the third week of March 1943, the American positions south of El Guetar look nothing like the careless scatter of February. The desert floor has been transformed into a gigantic workshop of war. From the salt flats of Chad el-Jarid to the rocky ridges of the eastern dorsal, the sound of shovels biting into Kalish never stops. Entire divisions dig as though their lives depend on it, because now every man knows they do. The 1st Infantry Division, the famous Big Red one under Major General Terry de la Mesa Allen, has taken over the critical Gafsa-Gabas road sector. Allen is a soldier, tough, profane, and utterly uninterested in headquarters politics. He has read every Kasserine report twice and boiled the lessons down to one sentence he repeats constantly: "We fight as a team or we die as individuals." His men love him for it. Behind the infantry, the artillery is undergoing the most dramatic revolution of all. American gunners have always had plenty of shells. What they lacked was the ability to bring those shells down exactly where and when they were needed. After Kasserine, that is no longer acceptable. Colonel Bruce Palmer, now Eisenhower's artillery coordinator for II Corps, institutes a system borrowed from the British, but improved with American thoroughness. Every battery, every battalion, every corps artillery group is linked by a single fire direction net. Forward observers, now hand-picked lieutenants who live with the infantry companies, are issued jeeps, extra radios, and absolute priority on the airwaves. On the training grounds near Feriana, something unprecedented happens almost every afternoon. 200 guns, 75mm howitzers, 105s, 155s, even the new 4.5-inch guns, fire a single, perfectly synchronized time-on-target mission. The shells arc across the sky at different velocities and trajectories, yet they all land on the same patch of empty desert at the exact same second. The explosion is a single, apocalyptic thunderclap that sucks the air from men's lungs a mile away. Gunners cheer like children. German listening posts 20 miles distant register the concussion on their seismographs and wonder what new secret weapon the Americans have invented. It is not a weapon, it is coordination. While the artillery perfects massed precision, the tank destroyer battalions are reborn. The 601st, 636th, and 899th TD battalions receive identical orders. Forget everything you were taught at Camp Hood. The new doctrine is only 3 sentences long, but it changes everything. Seek hull-down positions. Refuse to move under fire. Kill from ambush and concealment. Bulldozers dig long firing ramps into the reverse slopes of every ridge overlooking the Gafsa-Gabes plain. M10 tank destroyers, thin-skinned but armed with the excellent 3-inch gun, are driven nose-first into the ramps, turrets just peeking over the crest. Overhead, crews stretch camouflage netting so tight that from 200 yards the vehicles vanish completely. The men nickname their new homes wolf pits and paint snarling wolf heads on the glacis plates. Infantry training reaches a fever pitch. Terry Allen turns the hills around El Guetar into the toughest school on earth. Companies attack the same piece of ground again and again until every man can cross it blindfolded. They practice the new defensive doctrine obsessively. Primary trenches on the reverse slope, fake positions on the forward slope to draw fire, listening posts 50 yards out that withdraw the moment the enemy probes, pre-registered artillery concentrations on every wadey and saddle. Machine gunners learn to fire indirect barrages like mini artillery pieces, dropping bullets into dead ground the enemy thinks is safe. Minefields become an art form. Engineers of the 19th Combat Engineers sow thousands of American M2 anti-tank mines and Britain Kafif pineapples in patterns that channel attackers into pre-planned killing zones. They bury the mines deep enough that a tank will throw a tread long before the crew knows they are there. Every minefield is mapped, photographed, and tied into the artillery fire plan so that the moment a tank brews up, shells begin falling on the follow-on wave. Air-ground coordination, once a polite fiction, becomes a daily reality. 9th Air Force liaison officers move into battalion headquarters with their own radios. P-38 Lightning and A-20 Havoc pilots fly practice missions over the American positions, guided by ground panels and smoke shells. For the first time, American soldiers look up and see friendly aircraft not as distant specks, but as partners who answer their calls within minutes. On March 20th, George Patton drives the entire length of the El Guetar position in an open jeep, standing like a Roman charioteer, helmet flashing in the sun. He stops at every battalion command post, inspects every foxhole, kicks every pile of garbage to see if it hides unburied feces. Soldiers who once cursed him now grin when he roars past. They know the old man is insane, but they also know he will not ask them to do anything he would not do himself. That same day, German reconnaissance aircraft fly low over the American lines and see almost nothing. The careless tent cities of February are gone. Vehicles are dispersed and camouflaged. Weapons are hidden. The pilots report only light forces and no significant defensive works. Von Arnim reads the report and smiles. The Americans, he believes, have learned nothing of consequence. When the 10th Panzer Division attacks, it will roll through the Gafsa Gap exactly as it did at Kasserine. What von Arnim cannot see is the invisible web that now binds the American army together. He cannot see the telephone wires buried 6 inches deep along every wadi, the extra radios in every platoon leader's jeep, the artillery forward observers lying prone on every hill crest with maps covered in grease pencil concentrations. He cannot hear the quiet confidence in American voices on the radio nets, the way a request for fire support is now answered in seconds instead of hours. In the command post of the 1st Infantry Division, Terry Allen pores over aerial photographs with his operations officer, Colonel Darby of the Rangers. They trace the likely German avenues of approach with red crayons and smile the same thin, dangerous smile. They think this is still February, Allen says quietly. They're going to drive straight into the best-laid trap since Hannibal took a walk in the Alps. On the night of March 22nd, the moon is a thin crescent hanging over the desert like a scythe. American soldiers check their weapons one last time, tighten chin straps, and settle into positions that have been rehearsed 100 times. Tank destroyer crews sleep beside their M10s under camouflage nets. Artillerymen stack shells in neat pyramids beside each gun. Forward observers test their radios with whispered call signs. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird calls once and is silent. Across no man's land, the engines of 50 panzers begin to turn over, warming up for the dawn attack. The Germans believe they are the hunters. They have no idea that the prey has spent the last 27 days turning itself into something entirely different. This time, the Americans were preparing to fight a different war. Dawn on March 23, 1943, breaks cold and clear over the Gafsa-Gabes plain. A low ground fog clings to the whiteys like smoke that has forgotten how to rise. At 05:47, the first German shells begin falling on the empty forward slopes, where the old American army would have been sleeping. The explosions echo across the hills and raise only dust and startled jackals. There is no return fire, no frantic radio chatter, no burning vehicles racing rearward, only silence. In the German command post on Hill 772, Colonel Hans-Georg Pomeranz of the 10th Panzer Division peers through binoculars and frowns. The American positions look abandoned. He does not know that every shell is landing exactly where Terry Allen wants it to land. On fake trenches, on dummy gun pits, on positions evacuated 6 hours earlier. Pomeranz turns to his operations officer and snaps. They have run again, forward. At 6:15, the Panzer engines roar. 50 tanks, Mark IIIs and IVs of the 10th and 21st Panzer, supported by the newly arrived Heavy Tiger Company, roll forward in perfect formation, grenadiers riding on the rear decks. They descend into the wide, shallow valley the Americans have spent weeks preparing. From the air, it looks like open ground. From the ground, it is a shooting gallery. The first minefield is reached at 06:28. A Mark IV on the left flank throws a track with a sound like a giant tearing sheet metal. Then another, and another. Within 90 seconds, 7 panzers are immobilized, blocking the narrow lanes the Germans must use. The advance slows, bunches, begins to mill in confusion. That is the moment the Americans have waited for. High on the reverse slope of Hill 469, Lieutenant Joe Dawson of the 1st Infantry Division whispers into his radio. Red Dog 6, this is Red Dog forward. Execute fire plan Cobra. Repeat Cobra. 2 miles behind him, 112 guns from 75mm pack howitzers to 155mm long toms have been waiting with lanyards already pulled taut. The time on target mission is the one they have rehearsed 23 times in training. Every crew knows the exact second to fire. At 6:31, the sky falls. The shells arrive in one continuous, rolling detonation that walks the length of the valley floor like the footstep of an angry god. German tanks vanish inside black and orange fountains of earth and steel. Grenadiers are hurled from the decks like dolls. The leading Tiger takes a direct hit on its turret roof and brews up with a secondary explosion that showers the surrounding plain with burning debris. Radio calls in German become first frantic, then incoherent, then stop altogether. In the wolf pits along the eastern ridge, the 601st Tank Destroyer Battalion waits in total silence. Captain John D. McAuliffe watches the burning German vanguard through his binoculars and feels his heart hammering so hard he is certain the Germans must hear it. 50 yards in front of his hidden M10s, the surviving panzers begin to spread out, searching for a way through the chaos. Hold fire. Hold fire. McAuliffe whispers into the company net. The panzers roll closer, turrets traversing nervously. 30 yards. 20. Now. 16 3-inch guns fire almost simultaneously. The valley erupts again, this time with sharp, vicious cracks instead of the deep cough of artillery. Armor-piercing shot slams into the thinner side and rear plating of the German tanks at point-blank range. A Mark IV takes a round directly through the driver's viewport and stops dead. Another spins in circles, one track blown off, its commander screaming from the open hatch until a second shot silences him forever. The ambush is perfect. The Germans never see where the fire is coming from. Hull down and camouflaged, the M10s fire, traverse to the next target, fire again. In 4 minutes, 9 panzers are burning or immobilized. The rest begin to reverse frantically, only to discover that the minefields behind them are now covered by a second American artillery concentration. On the infantry line, the men of the 18th Infantry Regiment watch the destruction through their sights and feel something they have never felt before. Absolute confidence. Private First Class Walter Morris, a bar gunner from Brooklyn who was running for his life at Kasserine, now stands in a trench on the reverse slope and calmly squeezes off bursts at the dismounted grenadiers trying to escape the valley floor. "Come on, you bastards," he mutters. Class is in session. By 7:10, the attack has shattered. Pomeranz orders a withdrawal, but there is nowhere safe to withdraw to. American artillery has shifted to interdiction fires on the exit routes. Tank destroyer crews are already displacing forward to new positions, dragging their guns by hand to keep the pressure on. The Germans abandon 12 tanks where they sit and retreat under a hail of shells that never seems to stop. At 7:45, the battlefield falls strangely quiet except for the crackle of burning fuel and the occasional secondary explosion. American soldiers emerge from their positions and walk forward almost in disbelief. They expected another Kasserine. They received something else entirely. Terry Allen stands on the crest of Hill 469 beside Colonel Darby and watches the smoke rise. "Well, Stanhope," he says quietly, "I believe we just graduated." George Patton arrives an hour later in his jeep, sirens screaming. He leaps out before the vehicle stops and strides among the burning panzers like a man inspecting his own handiwork. A German crewman, badly wounded, is being loaded onto a stretcher. Patton stops, looks down at him, and says in perfect German, "You fought well, but you attacked the wrong army today." News of the victory races up the chain. Eisenhower receives the flash message in Algiers and allows himself the smallest smile he has shown in weeks. In London, British liaison officers read the intercepts and for the first time speak of the Americans without the faint condescension that has colored every conversation since Torch. At the other end of the Mediterranean, Erwin Rommel, now preparing to leave Africa forever, receives the report from von Arnim and stares at it for a long time. He has fought the British for 2 years and believed he understood the limits of democratic armies. Something in the terse German sentences unsettles him deeply. He underlines one line 3 times. Enemy artillery and anti-tank defense completely coordinated and extremely effective. Losses unacceptable. In the valley itself, American soldiers do something they have never done before. They pose for photographs beside knocked-out tigers. They pry the black and white Balkenkreuz insignia from turret sides as souvenirs. A sergeant from the 601st chalks a message on the side of a burned-out Mark IV. Kasserine University, class of March 43. By noon, the count is in. The 10th Panzer Division has lost 29 tanks destroyed or abandoned, hundreds of dead and wounded, and, most precious of all, its certainty that the Americans will always break first. American losses: 6 men killed, 21 wounded, not a single tank or gun lost. Word spreads along the front faster than any radio message. From the British 8th Army positions in the south to the French 19th Corps in the north, soldiers hear what happened at El Guettar and understand that something fundamental has changed. The Americans are no longer the weak link in the Allied chain. In the late afternoon, the desert wind picks up again, carrying away the smell of burnt cordite and diesel. The sun sets crimson behind the smoking hulks in the valley. In the valley of El Guettar, the Americans proved they could outlearn anyone. The smoke over El Guettar barely had time to clear before the lesson was already being taught again, this time on a larger canvas. Sicily, July 1943. The same 2 Corps, now battle-hardened, cocky, and still led by the improbable duo of Terry Allen and George Patton, lands at Gila. German panzer counterattacks come in hard and fast. Hermann Göring Division and the 15th Panzer Grenadier Division throwing everything they have at the fragile beachhead. They expect another Kasserine, another easy kill. Instead, they meet massed artillery that drops out of the sky like the wrath of an industrial god. Tank destroyers that refuse to budge from hull-down ridges, and infantry who fight from reverse slopes with radios glued to their ears. In 4 days, the Germans lose 136 tanks and the will to try again. Patton cables Eisenhower one line: "We are no longer students." Italy, September 1943 to May 1945. Salerno, Anzio, the Volturno, Cassino, the Gustav Line, the Gothic Line. Every time the Germans believe they have finally found the limit of American adaptability, the limit moves. At Anzio in February 1944, the Germans launch Operation Fischfang, certain that the beachhead will collapse under a concentrated panzer assault. They run into the same formula perfected in a Tunisian valley 11 months earlier. Minefields, registered artillery, hidden tank destroyers, and infantry, who have learned that ground can be traded for time, and time can be traded for shells. The attack fails so completely that German commanders begin referring to American fire support as the automatic artillery. They never figure out it is not automatic. It is simply rehearsed 1,000 times by men who refuse to make the same mistake twice. Normandy, June-August 1944. When the greatest invasion armada in history hits the Normandy beaches, the U.S. Army that steps ashore is unrecognizable from the one that fled Kasserine Pass 16 months earlier. Decentralized command is now doctrine. Every platoon leader has a radio. Every battalion has dedicated forward observers who live with the rifle companies. Time-on-target shoots involving hundreds of guns and naval gunfire are planned and executed as casually as requesting coffee. When the Germans counterattack with panzer groups at Mortain in August 1944, they are met by the 19th Tactical Air Command and the artillery of 4 American corps firing in perfect coordination. In a single afternoon, the attack is shredded so thoroughly that the German 7th Army begins its death march toward the Falaise pocket. The hedgerows of Normandy, once predicted to stall the Allies for months, fall in weeks because American lieutenants and sergeants on the ground invent the Rhino tank cutter out of scrap metal and beach obstacles, test it in one afternoon, and have it in mass production within 10 days. That is not industrial power alone. That is a culture that expects frontline soldiers to solve problems and trusts them to do it. The Ardennes, December 1944. When Hitler launches his last desperate offensive through the snow and forest, he counts on American inexperience and brittle morale. He gets Bastogne instead. Surrounded units do not panic. They call down artillery on their own positions with calm precision, rotate batteries to keep the guns from overheating, and hold until Patton's Third Army executes a 90-degree wheel in a blizzard that no European staff officer would have attempted. The learning curve that began with humiliation in a Tunisian pass has become so steep that the Germans are now the ones reacting, always one step behind. By the spring of 1945, the evidence is undeniable. From February 1943 to May 1945, the United States Army fought, on average, a major campaign every 4 months on a new continent against a new enemy in radically different terrain. And every single time it arrived greener than its opponents and left considerably better than it arrived. No other army in the Second World War, not the Wehrmacht with its years of polish, not the Red Army with its millions of veterans, not the British with their desert mastery, managed that rate of institutional learning. The numbers tell the story coldly. German tank losses to American tank destroyers and artillery rose from roughly 1-1 in North Africa to 7-1 in Northwest Europe. American casualties per division per month fell by more than half between Tunisia and the Rhine, even as the fighting grew more intense. After-action review teams became permanent institutions. The lessons learned pamphlets, born in a Constantine schoolhouse in 1943, evolved into the modern U.S. Army's Center for Army Lessons Learned. Decentralized command, mission-type orders, combined arms coordination at battalion level, and the cultural expectation that every soldier and officer is responsible for fixing what is broken. These were not inventions of the Cold War or of Vietnam-era reformers. They were forged in the fire of one catastrophic defeat and 27 days of ruthless self-correction. In the end, the real reason America won was simple. They learned faster than anyone else. They did not win because they started ready. They won because they refused, absolutely refused, to stay unready. Experience can make you confident. Adaptation makes you unbeatable. Victory belongs not to the strongest army on the first day, but to the army that improves the fastest between the first day and the last. And somewhere in the ruins of Berlin in May 1945, a captured German general is asked by an American colonel why the Wehrmacht, with all its skill and tradition, ultimately lost. The German thinks for a long time, then answers with a bitterness that still cuts. Because every time we developed a new tactic, you changed faster than we could exploit it. We needed months to retrain a division. You needed weeks. By the end, we were fighting the army you had become, not the army you had been, and we never caught up. The colonel nods, lights a cigarette, and says quietly, "That's what happens when losing once is unacceptable." The desert wind that scoured the paint from tanks at Kasserine Pass in 1943 kept blowing all the way to the Elbe in 1945. And every time it blew, it carried away another piece of the old American army and left something leaner, smarter, and deadlier in its place. That wind is still blowing today. In every after-action review, every field experiment, every young lieutenant who is told, figure it out and make it better. It is the sound of an army that decided long ago that the only unforgivable sin is to fail the same way twice. The real reason America won was simple. They learned faster than anyone else. If you believe forgotten World War II truths deserve the spotlight, subscribe for more untold brilliance.